How do you safely melt and pour soap without ruining it? Well, first, make sure you are actually using a melt and pour soap base, not just some random soap. If you haven't seen my discussion on soap bases, check the link at the end of the video and in the description. While I ramble on about melting soap, you get to watch me make a scrap soap. Using a soap fail from last year's Easter eggs, I really goofed the temperature, and the layers didn't adhere very well. After making sure you're using a melt and pour soap base and making sure that you know the melting point of that base, you want to determine which method is best for you. There's the double boiler method, the crock pot method, the microwave method, or a wax or soap melter. We'll talk more about each of these. All of these methods need strict monitoring of the temperature, with exception of a temperature-controlled wax or soap melter. Please remember, if you allow the soap to boil or simmer, it is burned. When soap burns, it smells gross and will likely set up very rubbery and no longer lather, really not even soap anymore. I accidentally boiled some and poured it into a mold anyway because I just wanted to see if it was totally ruined. It felt horrible on my skin. It was like rubbing my skin with a piece of plastic. Even just overheating the soap can make it cloudy or off color, rubbery texture, and destroy the lather, and it can cause it to sweat or bead up with glycerin dew. We'll chat more about glycerin dew in another video coming up, but for now, just trust me, don't overheat your soap. So the double boiler method is the first one we'll talk about. It's the only way to melt and pour soap on the stove. Basically, a double boiler is a heat-safe bowl. Tempered glass like Pyrex or stainless steel both work fine. And it's over a pan with a couple inches of simmering water. The water should not be full-on boiling, and the upper bowl shouldn't be touching the water. Use a wider bowl on the top or lift the bowl above the water with a heat-safe lift or insert. The temperature should remain only slightly above the melting point of your soap base, and you should monitor both the water level in the bottom pan and the temperature of the soap in the top bowl. I wouldn't leave it melted there for long periods over the heat, as it can lose too much water through evaporation, and that will make it susceptible to overheating. I'm going to leave a couple of pics at the end of the video for reference so you can see what a double boiler looks like. You can also purchase a pre-made double boiler or bain-marie, but the DIY version that you'll see at the end can work just as well. Second version is the crock pot method. I haven't used that one for soap, but I know soapers who swear by it. I feel like it's best for soaps with a higher melting point, or if you're going to use it fairly quickly once you get it melted. The downside here is that most crock pots on their lowest setting, like the warm setting, cycle to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. For the soap base I use, that's just too hot. The more control you have over the temperature and time settings, the better. Make sure you know your soap's melting point. I'm going to say that a lot in this video. Know the temperature and heating cycles of your crock pot. Make sure you use a separate crock pot for food. You might be able to find a fondue pot with a lower temperature range if temperature is a concern. Make sure you monitor the temperature with a thermometer. And as you're getting ready to pull the soap out of the crock pot, use something like a ladle to get the soap into your pouring vessel. The microwave method is next. This is the method I prefer for smaller to medium-sized batches, which is what I usually make. Using a high-heat, microwave-safe container, melt at small increments, 30 seconds at a time for a full pitcher, stirring or at least agitating in between each heat burst. You can sometimes get away with 45 to 60 seconds for the very first round, depending again on your soap's melting point, but I would keep it at 30 seconds after that. I actually prefer to lower the time of the heat blasts as my soap gets closer to melting. I'll start lowering the time when all the soap nuggets are submerged in liquid soap. I begin by lowering it to 20 seconds per burst and then 15. Please note, if you are melting smaller amounts, you will have to start with smaller increments. Occasionally, you may only need a tiny bit for something, so start with way less time. A tiny amount of soap can burn or boil in 5 to 10 seconds, so make sure you're watching carefully. Okay, the last method I have for melting melt and pour soap is using a wax or soap melter. For larger batches, a wax or soap melter can be a great solution. I have a large soap melter, but I only use it for my wholesale accounts. Other than melting large amounts, the benefit is a very controlled temperature, fluctuating only by a few degrees, even if it's left in there for hours. Keep in mind, before you purchase something like this, most of these have a minimum fill amount that they recommend for starting each session. So unless you're going to use large amounts, it's really not worth the money. Definitely worth the extra money to purchase the heated dispenser, or as the soap is poured, the dispenser can clog with cooling soap. I'm going to put a link to the company I bought mine from, but I really do not recommend these for beginners, as this would be a huge waste of money if you aren't already selling large amounts of soap, or teaching, perhaps, using large amounts of soap in some way. But I thought I should include it here just so that you have the info. Please note, you should always use equipment and tools dedicated to making soap. We're talking about melting equipment here, so I just wanted to remind you that you don't want to share kitchen items that you also use to prepare dinner. Speaking of kitchen tools, my favorite tool for stirring are the silicone stirrers, spatulas. I don't even know what you call them all, but they usually come in a set. Scrapers, that's another word for some of the shapes, I guess. Silicone spoon, silicone, however you say it. I find mine on Amazon, and they just are the easiest for me for soap. Can you use metal spoons? Yes, of course you can. Again, with any of the kitchen tools you use, you want to maintain them as soap tools only and not mix them with your stirring your spaghetti sauce. So I'm going to take a minute here to talk a little bit about the soap that you're watching me make. This style of soap has been called everything from confetti soap, scrap soap, to terrazzo soap, which I tend to call it because I grew up and still live in Florida, and Florida has a lot of terrazzo floors. There's little pieces of stone in the floors and kind of in a cement, and then it's a polished finish. If you haven't seen a terrazzo floor, they're really, really pretty. Just don't fall on one. You'll really hurt yourself. But these soaps, called terrazzo soaps, usually are made from scraps, but you don't have to. You can make them intentionally with the colors you want. But I was trying to use up some scraps today while we talked a little bit about melting soap. And I just wanted to take a minute to mention some of the things you may have seen me doing in here. I heated the soap base a little more than I usually do, not to the point of overheating it where it's going to ruin the soap, but I wanted to take it a little higher than usual for this kind of soap. Because I wanted to show you that trick. I just plopped in a little chunk of soap because that can be one of the ways to cool your soap faster. You always want to be aware of the time that you're going to need to add colorants and fragrance, of course, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Those things will definitely also cool your soap, so you have to heat it to hotter than what you want to pour unless you're not fragrancing or coloring. At least by a little bit. You can always pop it back in the microwave for a few seconds, like 5-10 seconds, if you need to heat it back up a little bit after adding those things. But I took it a little hotter because I wanted to show you melting that soap helps. It also helps when you're right here. What I'm doing, I'm even adding more colorant because it does also help cool the soap. I usually add the colorant first. We'll talk about this a little more in my colorant video, which is a little ways down the road. I'll add the colorant first because it's going to cool it down a little bit more for the fragrance, especially if I'm using a delicate fragrance. I'm careful with that, even though the flash point may be usually 180 is typical, and I never take my soap anywhere near that high. I still like to give it a little bit of I don't know, extra kid gloves when I'm using my fragrance. So I cool it a little bit first by adding the colorant, especially if you've got it mixed in with alcohol, which I normally do. You've seen me several times add mica without the alcohol, and you'll see that again here in just a minute. I was really not happy with the titanium dioxide that I just added. I was trying to make it a little more opaque, but I didn't like the color it turned. I know it doesn't look like a bad color on the screen, but I don't know, it just looked funny and I didn't like it. So I was mad at myself, and I added a little bit more mica at the last minute. I knew there was plenty of working time with the temperature I'd taken it to. Under normal circumstances, I probably would have left that little block in, the little crystal piece of soap in a little bit longer, and maybe even just left it in there. But I took it out because I didn't want it to get too cold. I like to pour soaps like this with a lot of confetti or a lot of chunks. Shredded soap, whatever you're adding, if there's a lot of what you're adding, it's going to cool the soap very fast. So just to be aware of that. If you only add a few, if you sprinkle in a few of those in a soap that's as hot as this is, which I think I pour around 130. Yeah, 130. If you put embeds in at that temperature with my soap, which has a melting temperature of 120 to 125, which is on the low end, it's the way I like it, it'll melt it. It'll melt it right away. But this is a soap where I'm adding a lot. I'm adding a lot of embeds, so I don't want it to seize up too quickly, so I pour it a little hotter. They adhere really well. I do spray them with a little bit of alcohol here. You see me doing and stirring. I did that a little bit earlier too off camera. It helps them to adhere when you spritz them with alcohol, but you do have to be cautious. You don't want to add too much. That can cause them to not adhere. And just the right amount of alcohol. It takes some experimenting, and it takes some getting used to, especially when you're using a different type of soap base than you're used to, or a new base. But a little bit of alcohol helps it adhere. I should have, and I normally, when I'm doing this kind of soap, you see me tapping it in. Normally I tap the sides of the mold as well. I don't know why I didn't here, but I didn't. So you see the little tiny sprinkles I put on top for decoration. That was just kind of an idea I had as I was making it. It wasn't like a planned thing, but I was like, oh, I'll hold a little bit of these crystals back. Well, they're really not crystals. Little chunks back, and make an embellishment for the top. Then, of course, if you know me at all, if you've seen any of my videos, you know I have a thing for glitter. And I put it in a lot of my soaps. Not every single one, but I couldn't resist with this one. It's kind of a confetti parade, I don't know, kind of look. It's like a party. So to me, it needed some glitter. Definitely looks better than the eggs did. Even if they hadn't fallen apart, I wasn't happy with the colors I'd chosen. I wasn't happy with the way the design turned out. So I probably would have cut them up anyway, but then they didn't hold together because I poured it too cold. Um, so here you see the little chunk. I love this little 4x4 mold because it's just fun to experiment with, or just do a little scrap soap like this, um, without wasting a lot of soap. It helps me to use up scraps. It helps me to get little samples. These, as you'll see, I make some mini soaps out of these. Sometimes I'll use them and it makes about, I don't know, 3 or 4 slices. I usually slice a little thicker than 1 inch. I like the soaps to be a little thicker. So a lot of times I'll slice it into 3, and then it will have sometimes a little end left, depending on how I set my Uncle Andy's, because you can change the setting on how thick you want the slices. So what I'm doing now here is just shaving a little bit off the sides, because another thing I forgot with this mold is I sometimes will push a little box on each side against it, or some books or something. And I just didn't with this one. I didn't push a lot of crystals or embeds down into it, so it didn't bulge out a lot, but it bulged out enough that it was bothering me. So I sliced a little off the ends. It keeps them from looking like they're bowed outward, like the mold bowed outward. So I didn't want the soaps to be really wonky. But these make great samples. I'll cut it in half, and then I'll cut it in half the other direction, and then cut those in half again. It gives me 8 little fun little sample sizes that I'll be giving out with my next orders. So if you want one of these, place an order and you'll get one for free. This I don't like. I don't like eyeballing and cutting my soaps, and that's all you've seen me do for these first videos. I don't know why. This just happens to be the designs I chose for the first few videos, with exception of the Galaxy, the mini Galaxy soaps. Those were in little round individual molds. But yeah, I'm ending up cutting by hand, which I'm not great at. I'm okay. I've gotten better. You have to line yourself up over the top of it, which when you have a camera also over the top of the soap you're making because you're filming, it's a little more difficult. I don't want to knock the camera with my head, and I don't want to get my head in the picture. So that's what you end up with, is me just taking my sweet time to cut these. They came out pretty cute, though. I had a hard time. They look pretty decent on camera when I was holding it up, but for some reason when I was filming, it didn't look like it was very good color. And then I took the pictures, and it didn't pick up well on the film for taking the pictures. I think it was a lighting issue. Sometimes my camera fights certain colors. My camera phones, or my phone camera. So the video's not done on that, but I don't know, it fought the colors a little bit too. Way worse in my light box, though. I adapted them as best I could. But these are so easy to make, and if you mess up a soap, don't throw it away. Unless it's burned or boiled, then yeah, throw it away because it's no good. It's just not great on your skin, and it doesn't lather. So, but these, I mean, they look great now. I think they look great now. It isn't a soap I would have planned to do, like, oh, I'm going to make a purple terrazzo soap. But I had those soaps that I pulled out for the soap fail picture at the beginning of my beginner's melt and pour soap series. I wanted to show that there are ways to avoid things like that. And I was looking for kind of an ugly soap, and to me it was ugly because it was falling apart. And I finally used it up. I was happy to use it in this, and I think it's much cuter now than it was. So in a minute you'll see the pictures from the light box. They're all right. But I want to kind of wrap up a little bit by saying that if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments or on the community tab. For my experienced soapers that are watching as a refresher course, let me know your favorite way of melting soap. One of the things I find great about making soap, melt and pour soap, is you find so many people doing things in a variety of ways and approaching designs very differently. My next beginner series video, I'll be making an easy shaving soap, while I also show you how I add clays to my soap. If this series has been helpful for you in any way, please like and subscribe to my channel and help it grow. It's brand new. I release a new beginner tutorial every other week, and on opposite week, more advanced designs, experiments, and other fun stuff. As always, my goal is to inspire you and help you to become a better soaper. Thanks. Bye.